Hello, and thank you for joining us. This is No Soundbites Allowed, and I am your host, Michael Voss, Dragon of the Southern Tier, and I'm happy to be here with you today. Now, today we're going to be looking at a very interesting question. What is environmental justice? Now, it's something you've heard a lot of. It's been in the news quite a bit. In fact, Joe Biden has signed an executive order all about environmental justice. We've seen it talked about by activists in the news. But no one has really answered the question, what is environmental justice? We were wondering, and so we want to share that with you. Now, before we get started, if you haven't been to the channel before, we do long-form political commentary here. And every Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we do a live stream allowing you to chat with us about what's going on in the world, reaching us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, as long as the internet overlords allow, and even to call into the program on the issues that matter to you and what your thoughts are, because we believe in the First Amendment. Now, we hope to see you on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, but let's get to the point today of what is this idea and this meaning of environmental justice, because it's something that's spoken about a lot, but no one seems to know what it is, or at least not the public. No one's telling us about it. In fact, you may have noticed there's been a lot of talk about a lot of things like racial inequality and social justice, another term that at some point we plan to go into. But even most recently, in listening to Susan Rice, who is Joe Biden's designee to serve as the Director of Domestic Policy, as it was reported, she was even talking about social equity and these programs. And she mentions that these aren't feel-good policies. The evidence is clear. Investing in equity is good for economic growth, and it creates jobs for all Americans. She goes on to cite that economists have estimated that the U.S. has lost a staggering $16 trillion over the last 20 years because of discrimination against families of color. Of course, when no one's ever mentioning which economists, what policies, how this was done. The biggest thing is, though, that these aren't just feel-good policies. There is clear evidence that this is good for America, and we need to make this change. And in fact, Joe Biden went on in his executive order from just yesterday, January 27th, he created the White House Environmental Justice Interagency Council. This is to address environmental justice in minority populations and low incomes, expanding the law from 1994. And its mission is they shall develop a strategy to address current and historic environmental injustice by consulting with the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council and with local environmental justice leaders. The Interagency Council shall also develop clear performance metrics to ensure accountability and publish an annual public performance scorecard on its implementation. What does that actually mean? What did that actually say? That Joe Biden has expanded the government. He has created another council, another agency of the government, filled with individuals most people don't know, that do a job most people aren't aware of. That's what he said. I mean, that's what's in the wording. A group of individuals the public has never heard of before are going to be consulting and having advisory meetings about environmental justice and with environmental justice leaders. Who are these leaders? Were they elected? Was there a vote? Do they belong to organizations? And if so, which organizations? Are we talking about BLM? Are we talking about Antifa? Are we talking about Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, otherwise known as PLOT? Is it part of the far left, the Democratic Socialists of America? Who are these leaders? Why are they considered leaders? And again, the question comes back to, what is environmental justice? What are they combating? So we had to take a look, and we looked it up, starting with Wikipedia, and said, hey, what is environmental justice? And we found out that this is a term that was created in the 1980s. And it's about describing there's actually two different versions of environmental justice. There is a social movement, and then there is a social science. So there's two different things. When you hear someone say environmental justice, they could be talking about a social movement, or they could be talking about social sciences, which deals with laws and other and environmental policy. So we really still don't know, what are they talking about? So let's go back and let's look from the Sierra Club into the 1980s. Where did this come from? This term, this historic term, which usually makes you think of something that would be 100 years ago. When we talk of in terms of things that are 100 years old, we talk of them as historic. But it's actually not that old. It actually goes back to 1982 in Warren County, North Carolina, with an incident with PCB and being dumped into low-income African-American communities, black communities. And then there was another study in 1987 talking about toxic waste and race. So what we know immediately about this is that this is solidly and completely surrounded by the idea of race in America. This is a racial issue, and it's taking the racial issue and putting it into other subjects. Now, I also want to mention, when we talk about these things, we have to define these terms. We have to figure out, what are we talking about when we say equity? What is equality? What is justice? We're going to go into all of those definitions because we need to understand that to understand what they're talking about. And especially since there's two different definitions to this, a social and a legal. So it's very difficult. And even when we look at what we see in the history of this from the Sierra Club as an example, we know that under President Clinton, there was an executive order that was established and that the government was working on environmental justice as early as the 1990s, which we will go into in detail. But we know that the Sierra Club, currently, the movement consists of an extensive formal and informal network of community, national, and international organizations that provide a new framework for addressing some of the most pressing environmental and social issues facing us today. Okay, so what does that mean? Again, even from the Sierra Club, there's no clarity here. What does this mean? What are they looking to do? Now, anyone who wants to clean the environment, that's a wonderful thing. But that would be climate change, not environmental justice. They're separate issues. They're separate things. Or in some cases, it seems like they overlap. But they're not really the same thing. They really address different things because environmental justice is based on race. And global warming is based on the environment, the global environment, everyone in the world. We've been told that very clearly by Greta Thunberg, a brilliant and leading voice in global science at the age of 16. So let's go into what is this equity we keep hearing about? Because we're worried about equitable services. What is this equity that everyone's speaking about? Well, we had to go and try and check this out. And we went to listen to the Annie E. Case Foundation and their definition as provided on August 24th of 2020. And the reason why we looked at this is because of this term. What is the definition? In searching for the definition of equity across the internet, this is the most common statement we found repeated over and over again and only defined and we found defined here. Equity is defined as the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. The concept of equality is synonymous with fairness and justice. Well, that's interesting because it's not some kind of immaterial value. This is about fairness. This is about being impartial. This is about justice. Except that's not really how it's defined. In fact, this very statement comes from the 2007 definition of equity, which we see from Dr. Scott Shreve, who said in 2007, the definition of equity is 1, the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. It is further defined as justice applied in circumstances covered by law, yet influenced by principles of ethics and fairness. So this is why we keep hearing that you can use all these qualifiers to justice. There's social justice, there's environmental justice, there's a justice for everything. Because it's not about actually justice. It's about a limited form of justice, a qualifier on it, a way of coloring justice. It's justice through a very specific prism, a very specific application, which is to influence fairness, which is what Dr. Shreve is saying. Because this isn't about justice. It's about an application. It's the way people want justice to be seen, not what justice is. Now, when you see this, and we looked at this definition, we had to go back and say, well, let's actually define justice. The actual definition of the word justice is the maintenance or administration of what is just, especially by the impartial adjustment of conflicting claims or the assignment of merited rewards or punishments. Now, that's the actual main definition of justice. The idea that we're seeing from the social justice warriors, the PC media, the far left radicals is the quality of being just, impartial, or fair. And this is important because it's not the same thing as what they quote. Again, going back to the most commonly used terminology from Scott Shreve, the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair. An ideal of being just, not actually being just, not the quality of being just, but the ideal. There's a big difference there. Because an ideal isn't real world. An ideal, the idea of beauty isn't real world beauty. It's not the same thing. And it's definitely not adjusting conflicting claims or assigning merit, rewards, and punishments. Justice is impartial. It isn't biased by considerations of color or gender or skin. Ideally, that never comes up. But when we're taking the ideal of justice, if we're taking the ideal of impartiality, well, then we can be impartial because we're adjusting this. We're flexing this. It's not really what's meant. In fact, that's why we see that by 2016, BLM activists, Working Family Party members, Citizen Action, the far left in America, were quoting and stating that when asked about what is this equality, this social justice equality, they defined it as, quote, everybody has a right to equity. This country guarantees us equal rights. Those rights are guaranteed to us, equal rights, based on our need. People don't need the same thing. So we can't bring parity in the country by dealing strictly with equality. And that's what we're trying to do, bring parity to the country. Now, this is important because it has nothing to do with the Constitution. There is no guarantee of equity in the Constitution. It doesn't exist. It's not in the amendments. It's not in the Bill of Rights. It doesn't exist. It's not even in the Declaration of Independence. This doesn't exist, but we're being told it exists. We are seeing these environmental justice, these social justice warriors tell us that it is a right, that this is a guarantee by the government where it doesn't exist, and that it's something that our Constitution, our law is based on our needs, which isn't correct. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness doesn't guarantee your needs. And it's not supposed to. But let's look at what's this, and again, let's look at what is the definition of equity. Because its primary definition is justice according to natural law or rights. But in particular, and looking at it from a far left point of view, their specific ideology, a system of law originating in English chancellery and comprising a settled and formal body of legal and procedural rules and doctrines that supplement, aid, or override common and statute law and are designed to protect rights and enforce duties fixed by substantive law. It is a means to override, to change, to adjust law that exists to enforce a different point of view. You're altering the law. No wonder we see these very, there it is. No wonder we see a lot of these activists so interested in equity, because equity allows them to change the law. And that's ultimately what they want, to change the law and to gain power. Black Lives Matter is a political organization that is meant to change the law and create a more communist society. Democratic Socialists of America is a political organization seeking to create socialism in America. The Citizen Action, the Progressive Leaders of Tomorrow, Antifa, each and every one of the far left organizations you can think of are there to change the law to gain more power for their ideology. That is the core of social justice, of environmental justice, of equity. And that's why we get the statement in 2016 when Black Lives Matter and Antifa entered the small community of Binghamton, New York, and they're talking about a right to equity, a right to change the laws to a certain ideology, that they are guaranteed this right based on need to change the views, change the laws to what they need. That's what we see that they're looking for. So this gives us an idea, an understanding, that they are looking to change laws to adjust the way that laws exist and how they are influenced and how they are used. That they want to have a concept of fairness and justice, but not the reality of fairness and justice. And this has nothing to do with equality. This is completely separate. They're not trying to make things equal. They don't want to have equality. What they want is an adjustment in favor of their ideals. Now, we've seen this from the 1980s going forward. No one really cared. No one paid attention, for the most part. There were improvements that were sought in various communities, but the concept of environmental justice was something that was an academic ideal, something that was touted and promoted and taught to students by one academic teaching the next generation of academics, very much like lesbian dance theory. It had no serious application in the real world because environmental protection laws handled, when applied properly, would handle exactly what they were looking to do. But that wasn't good enough. And in 1994, under President Clinton, there was an executive order put out. Federal actions to address environmental justice in minority populations and low-income populations. This was executed on February 11th of 1994 under President Clinton. So the Democratic leader made sure that they were going to put together an organization to enforce environmental justice, something the American public didn't really care about and didn't know. And this organization was involved in every aspect of the administration in the United States. It included the Environmental Protection Agency. It included the Department of Defense, Department of Health and Human Services, Department of Housing and Urban Development, Department of Labor, Department of Agriculture, Department of Transportation, Department of Justice, Department of the Interior, Department of Commerce, Department of Energy, Environmental Protection Agency, Office of Management and Budget, Office of Science and Technology and Policy, Office of the Deputy Assistant to the President for Environmental Policy, Office of the Assistant to the President for Domestic Policy, National Economic Council, Council of Economic Advisors. In fact, environmental justice was made a part of every feature of the United States government since 1994. And they have been actively working to adjust laws, to change laws, to change the context of laws to fit a political narrative. The American people really didn't notice it. It didn't really have any impact. And in fact, since 1994, this has been ongoing. In fact, if you go to the EPA's page right now, you'll see environmental justice at the EPA. This is something that has happened, and they define environmental justice as the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. This goal will be achieved when everyone enjoys the same degree of protection from the environment and health hazards, equal access to decision-making processes, to work on healthy environment in which to live, learn, and work. Okay, so the EPA since 1994 and every major agency of the United States government has been working on this definition, making sure that no matter what a person's color or race or origin or income, that you will be treated in the same exact way, and that the environment should be adjusted or looked at in the fairest way for all communities. Well, that's one of the definitions that we understand, and going back to what we saw from Wikipedia, that answers the social science aspect of it, but not the social movement. So we have to wonder, why is there so much talk about this now? In 1994, President Clinton put into place the environmental justice system in the United States government, and they have actively been working towards this. But yet we see that in 2021, Joe Biden has now had executive orders to create more groups, a White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, an Interagency Council to address historic environmental injustice. So we have to wonder, what happened? What happened here? Because it seems to imply that since 1994, environmental justice failed, that Democrats failed, that Democrats under Clinton and Obama completely failed in environmental justice, that this was a waste of money and time for the American taxpayers and the American citizens, that this was just a show, that these Democratic leaders, both in the presidency and therefore also in the Congress, made a lot of noise, created these organizations, took taxpayer dollars to pay for these organizations, these councils, and let it go, because it was only about power and showmanship. And now we see that Joe Biden, on January 27th, has expanded this show, expanded this pandering to the American people by going out and saying, hey, guess what? We have even more. We're doing it. And in fact, many people believe that social economic justice is a brand new idea, that this is the first time the American government is actually involved in this process, which is a lie. And that's an idea that's promoted by a lot of the advocacy groups, the environmental agents that want to make people believe that this is something that has been completely abandoned, ignored since the beginning of America. That's the impression that the news media puts out. That's the impression that these organizations are putting out for the American people. That is the social component of environmental justice. This hasn't been done before. No one has been paying attention. In fact, that's not true. People paid attention. It is a large part of the government, and it doesn't work. And that means, will it work under Joe Biden? Will this White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council, that has only the power to advise, but is connected, again, on another layer of government, is it going to make a difference? Or is it going to be like the executive order from President Clinton, where it's involved in a lot of things, but apparently, according to the activists, nothing's getting done? And if that's the case, that this is done as a pandering action, if it has no true impact, either socially or in the law, then is this even worth discussing? Is it even worth doing? In fact, couldn't we just make more effective what already exists? Why do we need more layers of government? Why do we need more individuals that the public does not know, that don't interact with the public on a regular basis? Why do we need them when we could just make it better for what already exists and make them more effective? Well, these are all interesting questions, and we're just going to leave it at this, that what is the meaning of environmental justice? It would seem that it is a way to make extremists feel happy about their interactions with the government. It's a way to interject gender and identity politics into every aspect of American life. It is a way to give certain groups of people more power over the government and the public. And it effectively does very little for the people that they proclaim to be taken care of. That seems to be the definition of environmental justice. A lot of words with very little meaning and even less action. But you may disagree. You may find that our information was incomplete. You may say that we misunderstand. And we look forward to hearing your comments about that, to help us all learn and understand, because we believe in free speech. And we hope that on Sunday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, you will join us in our conversation on our live stream. And in addition, if you have liked this, if you found it to be informative, please do like and share, and most of all, subscribe, so that more people will be able to add their voices in this free speech exercise. Until the next time, we thank you, and you hope you will be well.